This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be a substitute for mental health services.
Discussions in this show should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions. Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research Inc., a broker-dealer, member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Financial Wellness are not affiliated.
Welcome to Financial Wellness. I'm Stephanie, along with my childhood friend Chad. This is the place where we unravel the intricate connections between financial well-being and mental health. In each episode, we explore the complexities of personal finance and how our monetary choices impact our emotional and mental states.
Here is where we also discuss and learn how to get better at everything from budgeting to investments to insurance. We share personal stories, expert insights, and practical tips to help you navigate those connections between your financial stability and mental wellness. Make sure to show some love by liking and following us. It really helps a lot. So let's get started. Did you want to go first?
Our mental well-being is directly linked with our financial well-being. We can bring some normalizing and even some humor to these situations. You know, we're both from New Orleans. We like to bring a little fun to the table.
Yeah. It becomes empowering and it becomes something that you control versus something that controls you.
All right. So, Chad, what are we talking about today?
So today we are going to be discussing the emotional impacts of budgeting. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think it's a good foundation for everything that we'll be talking about on the show. But before we get into it today, we want to remind everyone to like, subscribe, and please throw us a 5-star review. We greatly appreciate it. And but let's get into it. So the first thing I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that you started your own budget in preparation for the show today.
He did. So I kind of have had, kind of a basic budget that, where I keep track of monthly spending, things like that. But last year, at the end of last year, we went back to, I have my monthly student loans coming out again, and I hadn't redone it since then. And that's it's a fairly sizable chunk of money. I also hadn't really changed it up since I got my new job and raise and all of those pieces. So I was just I was winging it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt so much more in control when I sat down and looked at everything.
Right.
But it also brought up some important questions for me that I was really looking forward to discussing with you. So yeah, it was a great exercise for me, and I think it's going to be really helpful for me just moving forward as I try to start my own business here soon.
Yeah, I mean it's a good practice, right? I mean, just you mentioning it's you feel like you have more control, it's a little bit more empowering. In some cases kind of eye-opening too, right? Like
Absolutely.
I remember going through years ago, going through expenses. I think we were getting ready, do taxes and going through our expenses from the year before. When I got to December, I'm just going through my bank ledger, right? I'm online going through all the spending in our bank account, and I see a whole bunch of restaurant spending. It was like, this restaurant, that restaurant, this fast food place, da da da. And it just seemed so it was a lot. So, me, I'm like the money kind of math Excel
Yeah.
spreadsheet nerd, right? So I take all these expenses and I put them in Excel and I just sorted out all the restaurant expenditures for that December. I think it was like December 19 or 2017 or something like that.
Yeah.
And when I looked at the numbers and I added them all up, all the restaurant spending for that month, I called my wife. I was like, Melita, babe, come here. Do you know how much we spent on
Oh,
restaurants alone in the month of December. And she goes, "Oh my God, I don't think I want to know." And I said, "We spent, I think it was like either 12 or $1,300 just in
oh my,
restaurants for the month of December." And it's one of those things because we weren't really following a budget. You know, it's holidays, we're working,
right,
we're shopping for the holidays and everything. Like it's just one of those things because we weren't really tracking it, just sort of lost
right.
control of it. Yeah, it was 1300. And she goes, "That's gross." And I was like, "Yeah." But it was one of those
I
eye-opening things
totally
that
picture her
made us
saying
look, yeah, she's like, "That's gross." But it was a good reminder for us to kind of track that and put a cap on that amount of spending per month. So
yeah, it really is. It's so easy to mindlessly spend money, and especially if it's something that you need. You need
yeah,
to eat. I mean, you don't need to go to a restaurant, but one of your basic needs is food and shelter, things like that.
right.
And so when you're spending money on food, you're like, well, I need food.
Hmm.
And so it's so easy just to let it just fly out the window. I think I did something very similar right before the shutdown and COVID, and when everyone was going to the grocery store and kind of stocking up. I realized that one person household spent $800 in that 2 week period on groceries. And I think I probably still, I mean, I've been cleaning out my pantry a lot, so we don't have the canned goods from 2020 anymore. But I mean, it wasn't it wasn't stuff I needed,
Right.
like stress buying. Yeah,
Like a stress bunny.
stress buying.
Oh, stress buying. Let's set a stress bunny. Speaking speaking of a speaking of a stress money, speaking of buying things that we really don't need. So yesterday we were at the scuba diving place and getting our daughter squared away to go and get her certification. The scuba store was selling these little keychains that hold your defogger for your goggles. And some of them are
Oh,
just plain keychains, and some of them have little expressions on them. And one of them said, "I pee in my wetsuit." And I totally had an impulse purchase and bought it as a gag gift for my wife because she pees in her wetsuit.
I'm sure she'll be very grateful that you shared that on the podcast.
I mean, where else? There's not really
There's nowhere
anywhere
else
else
to
to
go.
go. You don't really have a choice. So,
And every scuba diver will feel validated for that. Obviously, must be a thing. They have a keychain.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And everybody knew. So, so let's talk a little bit more about budgeting. So when you created your budget,
Hmm.
how did it make you feel? How does it make you feel now that you've had it for a while?
In the moment, it can be a little bit nerve-wracking to very much face this is what I'm spending money on. But I broke it down into my bills, and then I have another page on the Excel spreadsheet. And that's another one of my questions is I want to know how you do budgets. Like, do you use software? Do you use, that's one of my questions for later on.
Hmm.
Um, After filling out the budget, I feel relief because I know what's coming in and what's going out. That is, to me, just a huge relief. The second piece is I feel empowered because I am so much more aware. I mean, I really was winging it, and it was fine. I'm not I wasn't overspending or anything like that. I was in some areas, but it also made me think of the future a little bit more. So one of the things that came to mind for me is I was remembering my dog Ruby. When Ruby was 14 or 13 or 14, I had a lot of vet expenses. we were at the vet all the time. And I now have a dog who is much healthier than Ruby was, but is around that same age. And I was thinking, like, huh, I probably need to put something in my budget that accounts for the fact that I have these aging dogs that are probably going to need more vet care.
Right.
So things like that. Yeah, it was a great exercise for me. And it was also empowering for me to, I do kind of like to put the numbers in the spreadsheet and kind of have everything line up. And it just felt good.
It's comforting to see too.
It
Like you
is.
see it written on paper. It's kind of like the conversation we had around financial planning. There's a lot of power in writing things down,
There
and
is.
it can be daunting, but once it's done, it's a pretty powerful and comforting thing.
Right. And it let me really look at what I'm prioritizing. What do I need to prioritize? Where do I want to spend more or less money? Those sorts of things. So
Mm.
like travel, my putting money aside for travel, that is essential for me. And I hadn't made that a priority. I made it a priority mentally. It's like planning the trips in my head, but I hadn't made it a priority financially.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's huge. Well, congratulations. How long have you had it now?
I had kind of a baseline budget, probably, since I was in my 30s and 40s, but I have become more and more structured and detailed the more that I have learned about finances. You've actually impacted me a lot because now I've got investments and things that I'm trying to do that are maybe a little, I don't know, higher level. Things that I didn't think I could do, things I didn't have training to do.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes a ton of sense. Now, I'll go ahead and answer your question about, how do I track it? And it
Yeah,
depends. Because there, seriously, like if you have a smartphone and you type in the word budget app, you will
there,
come up with so many different options and some well-known companies that you probably heard of. Good chance all those are good tools. So there is no shortage of online tools, apps. You can type in Google and type in budget app and pull a ton of online tools as well. You can go to some of the major investment slash insurance companies. Many of them will have financial education tools right on their website. For me, for my clients, there's a financial planning tool software that I use that incorporates budgets and incorporates their income and spending, and it's a little bit more detailed, factoring in inflation and a whole number of other things. Personally, I'm an Excel guy. I'm
yeah,
an Excel. Did I tell you, have I ever shown you my Freak in the Sheets coffee mug?
yes.
So my wife bought me this Freak in the Sheets coffee mug that's got an Excel picture of an Excel spreadsheet or an Excel logo with it says Freak in the Sheets. And I love it because all I do, any chance I have to create something in Excel, I'm gonna do it. So for me, I use Excel a lot. It just helps me I can make edits very quickly. I can add new expenses, get rid of old ones. So that's kind of my go-to. But a lot of times too, for clients who are just getting started and people just getting started, I mean, a budget can be started with something as simple as a little notepad, a little
Right.
a little spiral notepad. Just start tracking expenses. Um, you know,
That's how I started, when I bought my first house in my 30s. I just had a little notebook and it was like, May. Just put everything down.
hmm
But, I was
Yeah.
thinking, and one of the reasons I was specifically asking about tools is because the Excel spreadsheet tracks everything, but it doesn't provide feedback. Like even my bank,
Right.
like breaks things down a little bit, talks about, gives little pieces of feedback, like you're spending a lot of money in this area.
Mhm.
And, you know, I don't know if I need that right now. I probably should look into that, um, but the Excel spreadsheet's really just your basic, like, this is what you're doing. And
Right.
then maybe the software, some of the software pieces, like you said, will look at things like inflation and maybe give you offer tips,
Yeah, I mean,
things like
a lot of these, you're right, right, and that's, can't necessarily name any specific tools, but a lot of the online tools, in addition to tracking your spending, they'll help you categorize, whether you're spending on entertainment or whether you're spending on car gas or whether you're, spending money at the grocery store, or it'll help you categorize, whether you're spending too much at restaurants, right?
that.
It'll help you categorize those areas where you're spending money, and then it gives you the opportunity then to go back and say, man, I'm spending a ton, on dry cleaning. That actually happened, by the way. I had a
Really?
client when we were working through their budget. And whenever I work with somebody, we have to, I have them go through their expenses as detailed as they can,
Right.
or as detailed as they want to go into. I remember years ago, some clients of mine had this massive monthly expenditure on dry cleaning. It was actually eye-opening for them because they were like, "Oh my gosh, we're spending this much money on dry cleaning." And I was like, "Yeah, that seems like a big number."
Interesting.
But going through that process sometimes, kind of like the restaurant, gives you the opportunity to discover where you're spending, and in some cases make a determination on what's normal spending. Like, oh yeah, that feels comfortable. I'm spending, X amount on, gas per month on my car. That sounds about right. Or, holy crap, why am I spending so much on dry cleaning? Or holy crap, why am I spending so much, at restaurants, right? So it gives you that opportunity to empower yourself to take control over what and where you're spending.
Can I, is it confession time? Something I've
Yes,
done? Oh,
yes. We
it's
should have
going.
a bell for that.
Yeah, I actually have a bell, so I'll go get it for our next one. Boy, this one's really embarrassing, Chad. I mean, really embarrassing. So I play Candy Crush. Do you ever play Candy Crush?
I used to.
I'm way late. Like, I think people played it like 5 years ago. But every now and again, you can like buy more gold or whatever to go on to the next level. Like, if you need like additional, money for additional turns or whatever. And so, every now and again I'll do it. And I just didn't really think I was doing it a lot, but it's because it's like $2, and you just hit the button and I was spending approximately $20 a week on that, which, Chad, that's $80 a month
on
doing that.
on Candy Crush?
Yes.
Wow.
No,
That
I told you it's
that's
so
impressive.
embarrassing.
That's impressive. Yeah, I wish I had something constructive to say.
What is stop it?
I would, as your advisor, I would caution you on that line item in your
I
budget.
mean, it's it right. It is so stupid. And I just had not really paid attention to it.
Right,
And I am paying attention to it. And there is no reason for me to spend that money on a stupid game on my phone.
right.
So I'm
But to your point,
yeah,
it's an easy thing to do to lose
right,
focus.
right.
And when we talk about issues about anxiety and issues of shame around money, sometimes things happen and we lose focus and then we realize it, and it becomes one of those embarrassing things that we're ashamed to, say. And so I'm glad that you shared that story because it's it's common. And but for whatever reason, we think that we can never make any mistakes about with money, or else we are stupid or ill-equipped or less than in some way. And we all do it.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and I wanted to share it because it really did take me by surprise. And
Hmm.
and I have, especially since you and I have been talking about all of this, I have been more mindful of where my money goes, even, just in the past few years. And, I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this is what I'm doing. And yeah, so I wanted to share it, hoping that that was relatable for other people.
Hmm.
Um, and because, it really did take me by surprise.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it is relatable, not just for the people who have made those mistakes, but hopefully it's also relatable for people who have loved ones that are
Right.
making those mistakes too. Our son, our producer, Santiago, not our son, but my son.
Your son with your yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
He's learning how to manage money, and he's got a job, and he's trying to, not overspend, and he does the Chick-fil-A runs and more runs to pretty much every fast food joint around town. And he just started working on a budget this week.
Oh, wow.
And so hopefully, it's going to take some time because it's an adjustment. And at 19, it's your focus on something like that is a little bit different than when you're our age. But
Right.
um, but also, he's gotten to the point where he gets his bank account really low and he'll overdraft it. And, as his father, I want him to know that there are better ways of doing this, but at the same time, trying to express to him that it's not something that is inherently bad or wrong. It's something that needs to be learned and taught.
Right.
And so
Right.
we're working through those processes of hopefully teaching and learning so that it doesn't happen again. Because the biggest issue there too is you're overdrafting your account and you're paying extra fees for overdrafting your account and losing more money than you otherwise would be able to keep. And so those are some of those impacts of not having a budget and not having a plan, is that you tend to overdraft your account, or it's more likely that those things can happen.
Well, and in this day and age, what's also really essential about it is we have, auto payments. And so if your auto payments are not connected to a credit card and they're connected to your account, your bank account, and you neglect to remember or include that in your budget, you can have some issues. So, and it's just so easy for you. You don't even have to go click a button to pay that bill. It just comes out every month.
Right,
So there are a lot of ways I think people can get in trouble, and it can cause a lot of stress
right.
to their lives. So
No, I agree. And I think too, it's probably important for you and I to take a step back and sort of baseline exactly what we're talking about. And
yeah,
I think the first thing is to explain to folks exactly what a budget is.
yes, let's do that.
And really, all a budget is a plan for people for where they're going to spend their money. That's it. It's a plan for where you're going to spend your money. And the way that you develop that plan, well, there are a few ways that you can develop a budget. I mean, one is to look at what all of your key expenses are, your essentially spent expenses are, like what you mentioned, right? Your house expenses and your utilities and food and gas for your car and your health insurance, all those critical monthly expenses, like your have tos, right? Your essential expenses. And then factoring in, your nice to have expenses, right? Your non-essential expenses. And that's kind of the fun stuff. That's your entertainment, going out to movies and going out to, going out to restaurants and travel and kind of those fun things that you want to be able to do, and factoring those costs in every month, in a way that fits your income, and also in a way that leaves room for you to set money aside for savings and for emergencies, and also to give you some room to set aside money for the future, for retirement, for investing, for other things. So your budget can help you kind of categorize all of those different types of ways that you're going to set money aside. And in some cases, a good way to start, if you don't know, a good way to start is just to write what we were talking about before, writing down what you're spending money on now, and getting a little notepad, getting a little spiral notebook, and writing down, what did I spend money on today, or doing it as you go, or getting an app and tracking it that way. Whatever it takes for you to really get a grip and a handle on what you're spending money on is really the beginning baseline to create a budget.
It really, it can be so empowering, like I said before, to take that chunk, whatever that chunk is that is coming in, and say, this is where all of it goes. All of
Yeah.
it. For some people, you're like, it's not enough. And you and I have talked about that a little bit too, which we can touch on that a little bit later. But knowing that you are prepared and knowing that you know what's coming, those pieces really help to lower anxiety a great deal.
Yeah.
And even if it's very, very basic, just we've talked about this so many times, the awareness of what's going in, what's going out is essential to
Yeah.
lower anxiety and stress.
That actually brings a question for me relating to anxiety, and really related to the idea of creating a budget. And sometimes the idea of creating a budget creates anxiety.
Yeah.
This stress around actually going through the process of doing it seems like it can be difficult sometimes for folks. But then at the same time, once it's done, it's sort of like this release. There are times when I have like a to-do item on my to-do list, right? And whatever, it doesn't even have to be a budget. Like I have this item on my to-do list, and it's just one of those tasks I know is only going to take me like 10 or 15 minutes to do, but it stresses me out for no good reason. And I put it off for days, in some cases, weeks. I'm not even exaggerating. Something I know is only going to take 10 minutes. I just cannot wrap my head around doing it. But then once it's done, I look back and I say to myself, freaking seriously, like that took 10 minutes to do. Why did I stress about this for 2 months? Is that
And that,
normal?
yeah, that's procrastination, right? That's giving your time and energy to the avoidance of doing something. And you
Mhm.
spend hours of your life on that thing, but you're doing it in your head. And one of the things that's really interesting is, we've talked about the amygdala and the stress response in the body. Correct? Have we talked
You and
about
I
that?
have, yeah, but we haven't talked about it on this show.
We haven't talked about it on this show. So what's really interesting, and again, I am not a neurologist. I can't claim to even know all the regions. I'm no expert on the brain. But one thing that I do know is that our anxiety and stress response is not in the more developed parts of our brain. It really is in a part of our brain that is deeply, deeply instinctual, that believes we are in danger from whatever this task is. And so our anxiety is kind of living in this primitive mindset, whereas the doing of the mindset takes, more of the frontal lobe, or, it takes more of, of a sophisticated thought process to do it. So the doing of the task and the worrying about the task live in two different parts of your brain. So that might be one of the reasons why procrastination happens so often. But the other piece is that we are giving our time to that task, whether we're doing it or not.
Right.
And that is, and it can be, it can, we've all done it. It's not unusual. I bet every person out there listening can relate to that thought or that scenario that you experienced that you shared with us. Gosh, why am I stumbling on all my words today? Santiago, cut all that out.
I think we're going to leave that in. So,
No, I would say we that scenario that you shared is so common, and I don't think people quite understand why they're doing what they're doing. And I think that might be one explanation because your doing of the doing of the task is going to take a little bit more sophisticated brain work, and the worrying about the tasks is living in your amygdala and your autonomic nervous system, and it's your body sensing danger.
so then, aside from just the basics of creating a budget, like the math and the science of it, of writing numbers on paper, how does somebody actually just overcome this mental roadblock of just doing it, like writing it down? What are some ways that folks can do that?
I think building some awareness, taking small steps, and asking for help. So, accountability can be a huge motivator. Going to someone that you trust, even if it's a friend, like, let's do our budgets together. We don't have to look at them, but we're going to do them at the same time. Having some camaraderie, those pieces are always helpful. Looking online and seeing what resources you can find in your area. Maybe there's some financial planners, or there might be something at your bank. There might even be something embedded in your bank account that could be helpful. So just building the awareness and starting to look at what's available and what's out there, you may discover it's not as scary as you think it is.
Yeah. You mentioned the bank account. I think I know my bank account, the online access actually breaks down your spending, right?
Mine
And
does too.
yeah, so that's a good place to start. You said something interesting about accountability. I have a client that I'm working with, a single woman, and she mentioned that she has a group of professional women, and they get together and they discuss they work together to discuss their finances, and they track their numbers together, their individual numbers, but they track them as a group. And it seems to be a great way to do it. It's empowering. It's holding everyone accountable. It's keeping you focused on your goals and your task at hand. And it just sounded like a great way to go.
And it brings in that really necessary social support. One of the things that happens when we're trying to keep secrets from ourselves and from others around us is we can isolate. And so to
Mhm.
find that social support where it's safe to talk about things like money, mental health, whatever it is, can be it can alleviate so much stress.
Yeah. And those discussions around money are always sort of one of those taboo things, right? People don't want to talk about money. I know that in my family, that was we never really talked. We talked about it, but we didn't really talk about the skills. Like I know that my parents did a lot of things for me to put me in a good financial situation when I finished college, for example. However, I didn't really know or understand or appreciate because we didn't really talk about what they were doing. You know what I mean? So I didn't really know. I found out
Or
later
the
the things that
why,
they did. So
like
yeah, I didn't know the why or
yeah.
why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? And and it's really important for families to discuss these things with their kids. And then two, it's educational
Right.
because we don't learn these things by osmosis as much as we would like to. As much as we would like to think that we do, we don't learn these things through osmosis.
Well, and think about the message that you're sending to your children if you say, oh, we don't talk about money, or talking about money is crass, or talking about money is not acceptable, then you're sending that message to your children that you should never discuss money with
Mhm.
anyone ever. And that is what's going to keep those bad habits alive. It's going to keep people from educating themselves about resources, and how to grow their money. It keeps people down, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, no, those things are very important. And then when it comes to creating a budget too, if anything, it helps you to avoid wasting money. Whether it's
I mean,
wasting
like
money.
$80 a month on Candy Crush.
Oh,
Would
that is
that be
a that
considered?
is a gigantic waste of money. But I will tell you, but don't feel bad. I'm not being judgmental because I play Golf Clash, which
You can
like
judge. I'm
which
judging me.
remember before we got on here, I said, "Hey, I'm
Right.
taking a golf shot." I play this game called Golf Clash, and for the most part, it's free. But if you want to get like the new fancy ball, or you want to get these credits to play in like the higher stakes games, if you haven't won enough to have enough credits built in to just keep playing, you have to go and buy those credits to get back in. And occasionally, I will go on like a little spree where I buy, and it's small, right? So that's how they get you. It's like a
Right.
$1.99 here. It's $3.99 there if you want to get the special golf ball. And before you know it, you spent, 20, $30 in a month on this stupid game. And
Right.
and then for me, I sort of rationalize it and I'll say, well, I don't really go to Dave and Buster's a lot, but if I went to Dave and Buster's, I would have spent like $80 on, a game card for the day. So this is just like, we find
Your
ways to sort of,
entertainment fee.
right, we find ways to kind of rationalize, these sort of nonsensical expenditures.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and kind of going back to what you were saying before, I think another reason why people can procrastinate doing a budget is because our budgets are deeply linked to our basic needs.
mhm,
If we don't pay the rent or pay the mortgage, we lose shelter. If we don't have enough money for food, then we don't have food, and we that's something we need for survival. I think there is a really deeply ingrained fear around those basic needs not being met financially, which can cause avoidance.
yeah,
And avoidance is just can often be procrastination or lack of looking at things without looking and being aware of what is going in and going out. Then you can avoid the stress of potentially losing your home or not having food for the month, things like that.
yeah. And two, it seems like it would also be a way to avoid asking yourself the tough questions. So, for example, you could do a budget. I remember one time I looked, I sat down, I went through all my expenses and I went through my income and I saw the gap between my income and my expenses, and I was like, man, why don't I feel like I have that much money left over, right? So then it really forces you to really dig into some of this extra spending that you're doing that you may not always be tracking. Right? It
Right.
forces you to kind of look in the mirror and ask yourself some tough questions. And it's hard to do. And then you have to go back and dig in to find out, well, where am I spending this extra money? And do I really have it in me to cut that spending out of my lifestyle? And so those are those tough discipline questions that we're all forced to address at some point. And budgeting can be very powerful to get you to do that. And if done well, it really can help you make those tough financial decisions in order to put yourself in a much better situation. But it will force you to make some very difficult self-reflective decisions.
And yeah, and another thing that I think about too is when you aren't living on a budget, a lot of times, and especially if you have a very close line between the money coming in and the money going out, or if you don't have enough money coming in and your expenses are more than what your income is, then what you are experiencing is crises all the time. And so if you're having to dig into March's budget to pay February's rent or mortgage, you're digging yourself a hole that is going to be almost impossible to get out of. So you're having a crisis every time the energy bill comes or the rent is due, or and you don't have enough money, or you have children you have to feed and you only have $20 in your pocket and you have to spread that out through the week. And living in crisis mode day to day is very, very bad for not just your mental health, but your physical health. And it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable financially, it's not sustainable physically and mentally. And so and then you are living in survival mode and starting to look at your budget, look at the money coming in, looking at ways of getting assistance for the things that you need. Those take so much more energy than a proactive approach of looking at your budget initially really would. And I'm not saying a budget is going to solve poverty, it certainly is not, but learning what resources are out there and available to you can be very difficult when you're in a crisis. So it can be very, very significant.
Right. And to that point, I mean, the situation, that financial difficulty doesn't go away just because you didn't do a budget, right? You still have
Exactly.
that anxiety, you still have that angst, but at
But no
least
plan, no
no
plan to get
plan,
through
right?
it.
Then it just
Right.
becomes this thing that's weighing on you in your brain. It's kind of like what I talked about procrastinating. It's still living in my head, whether I do anything about it or not. And so, no, I think that's a really good point. So, you know, just kind of wrapping up here, but can you talk a little bit about decision making and creating a budget and how does that help people just in general with ongoing decision making skills?
When you are in that highly elevated stressed place, when your autonomic nervous system is dysregulated and you're living in survival mode, making decisions based on facts. So a pros and a cons and a decision making tree of some sort is very, very difficult. If you are able to look at your finances specifically, make a plan, get assistance in whatever ways that you can, that will then lower your stress so that you can start to make better decisions in other areas of your life. So I don't think people quite understand how difficult it is to make decisions when you're under stress, but it really is taxing on your brain. And I think we have a lot of decisions that we have to make in life, and people will talk about decision making fatigue in general. When you create a plan and you follow along with the plan, you lower the number of decisions that you have to make, freeing your brain up to make other decisions. So maybe that means getting some retraining so that you can go into a higher paying job. Maybe that means finding resources in your area that can assist you. Maybe that means you're just freed up to, I don't know, not spend $80 on a game on your phone. And now you have that $80 to put somewhere that's a priority in your life. Like maybe you want to get a massage once a month, and now you have the money to do that. So there are just a lot of different ways of looking at it. A plan alleviates the stress of your brain constantly having to make decisions under duress related to your finances, but it helps in everything.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I mean, that goes a lot to what we were talking about having a larger financial plan so that when you are in crisis or when the market does take a downturn, your plan alleviates, I should say, limits all these different options, right? Do I take all my money out of the market now? Do I do this? Should I panic? Let's go back to the plan. Let's see where we are. Because remember, the plan has a larger focus. We're retiring at a certain point in the future. We're sending our kids to college at a certain point in the future. Did this short term market downturn did it negatively impact? Well, of course it did because it you lost money. But did it get you off track from achieving your goal? Well, actually, no, it didn't. And going to your plan eliminates all these other options right away, right?
Right.
Because now you're still on pace and you also planned for that. You planned for the market downturn because that was included when we started this process. But it's interesting that you talked about decision making and eliminating this decision making in your life as much as possible. So it made me think about this time I was dating someone.
Okay, I
And
like all stories that start with this. Okay, keep
so
going.
no, it's actually a very short story, but I was dating someone who was a fairly successful business person, and she had a staff, and she had like 4 or 5 employees, and she was constantly making decisions all day. I remember we were going to go out to dinner, and did the whole, hey, where do you want to go? I don't know, where do you want to go? And she said, look, I have to make decisions all day long. I don't want to decide where we go eat. Wherever you pick, I'm fine with. I just don't want to have anything to do with this decision. And I said, great. And I actually recommended a place, and she said, I don't want to go there. No, I'm just kidding. She didn't actually say that. We picked a place, and that was it. But it was that always stood out to me of having that idea of having to make decisions all day long, and it gets tiring, and
It
it
is.
wear on you.
Well, let me bring up one other point too that I think people will hopefully resonate with. Even if you don't have a budget written down on paper or in an Excel spreadsheet or using software, there is a level of budgeting that you're having to do every day regardless. So if you have needs and you only have $20, you are having to budget and make decisions around a budget that includes just that $20. And so that might mean, okay, I can spend $10 on gas to put gas in my car. And then I need to get this, this, and this. And then my $20 is gone. So you're still making financial decisions. You're just doing them under duress. Does that
Well,
make sense?
yeah, I mean, it goes back to exactly what we were talking about when you were telling me about procrastination. You're still living the problem in your head,
Right.
whether you write it down or not, whether you do it or not, it's still existing in your head. That's probably, I mean, for me, after we finish recording today, I'm going to go and knock out some of those things that have been sitting in my to-do list for the last 2 weeks. Because you're 100% right. But too, it also reminds me, I remember early on in my young professional career when I had no money, right?
Yeah.
And $20 is a pivotal number because there was a time where the grocery store would take a check, and if you wrote the check for $20 over what your grocery bill was, they would give you change. So knowing that I would get paid in a day or two, I would write a check for $20 over the expense at the grocery store, and I would have $20 in my pocket for the next couple days to get by. And
Right.
I'll never forget that. I hope people realize that when we talk about these issues, we're not talking about it from some high, lofty ivory tower somewhere. Like we actually live this shit.
For sure. And it's a roller coaster.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So, as we kind of wrap up, I just want to remind everybody, everything that we talked about today, there are tons of tools available for you to get assistance with how to create a budget. You can Google budgets and you're going to get a ton of information. If you have a smartphone, just type in budget app. There are tons of info and tons of tools right in the palm of your hand. While you're listening to this podcast on your phone, you could actually go to your app store or your Google Play Store and download any number of budgeting apps. And there's a lot. I mean, but like we said before, even if it's something as simple as going to your grocery store or your drugstore and just getting a little spiral notebook, something you can that can fit in your pocket, and just start writing down what you're spending. You can create a little spending log. It doesn't have to be a fancy techie app. It can be just writing things down on paper. Just starting to take control over and getting a handle on what you're spending every day and every week and every month, and make that understanding part of your everyday life. And it'll be surprising how empowering that is over time.
I agree. I think the a lot of what you and I talk about in this podcast is about taking a lot of the unconscious things that we do and bringing them to our awareness
Yeah.
and helping us to take a look at the things that we're doing that we don't even know that we're doing.
And in the end, your budget will look a lot like that spending log that you created,
Right.
that you started writing down. It will look a lot like that. But instead of recording what you already spent in your budget, you will write down what you plan to spend. And it becomes proactive and it becomes empowering and it becomes something that you control versus something that controls you.
Oh, yes. Excellent. Something you control as opposed to something that controls you. I think that says it all, Chad. Thank you. So that's financial wellness for this week. What are we going to talk about next time, Chad?
So, next week, we are going to discuss anxiety and depression and the role that debt plays in those. So, remember again, everyone, to like and subscribe and make sure to take care of your mind and your wallet. And we will see you next week.
Thanks, y'all.